Everyone. I spoke at the beginning because I wasn't sure that we were in total silence for the colleagues and friends that were coming in. So yes, also from my side to welcome you to this webinar. Today, this morning, we're doing this webinar about a journey, an intentional investment that we have done together with King's College London, but also together with many of the key stakeholders, organizations that work in the Middle East and North Africa region on child marriage. And this webinar is really for all of us to discuss. We really want to share with you what we have done in the last years, different steps that are all linked together, and that for us have been a little bit the journey on how to work better and work more efficiently on child marriage in this region, applying evidence-based and participatory approaches. That is very easy to say, but we have it's not so easy to do in practice. So I will tell you a little bit, I will give you a little bit of an introduction on what are the different steps of this journey. But I just want to emphasize that we're doing this webinar to enhance discussion, to share learnings, also challenges, and basically to share with this audience what has been the process, what we have created, why, with whom we have done this. And I hope that you enjoy, and I really welcome everyone to participate as much as you want. But then before I give you a little bit of an introduction on these different steps, that then there will be detail. I just want to briefly take a moment to mention and to appreciate the presence today of my co-presenters. I will, of course, introduce them as they deserve before they start their interventions, but just to thank Dr. Aisha Hutchinson, Alia Al-Turki, Julie Rialet, and Maria Bray that are this morning with us. And all of them has been an essential part of the work that we have done across these last years on child marriage and on the different products and steps that we have created. So I will, as I said, I will introduce you to them a little bit later, but just to say thanks, and thanks for being here and the work that you have done from the beginning. So what is the journey that I was telling you about? Well, so the journey starts with a research that we had the pleasure to do Terre and in partnership with Dr. Aisha Hutchinson, that is this morning with us. At that time, she was based in the University of Bedfordshire in the UK, and now she's based in King's College London. She will give you a little bit more details. And this research, we invested 5 years to do this research. She will present some of the findings and the methodology. And then also my colleague Vesna will share with you in the chat the link, so you can all access to this research. This research is called Understanding Child Marriage Among Syrian Refugee Communities in Jordan and Lebanon. And we will also provide details on why specifically this group in these two countries. So the journey starts with as you see, with a long research in which we have invested a lot of time, time, energy, and was really a process. Very important for us, and definitely the piece that we wanted to build on to improve our programming and our policy actions. So it's also at this point is also it's important to say that the discussions in the Middle East and North Africa region with academics, but also with practitioners, with different agencies, international, national, and community-based organizations working on the field of child marriage, have stressed the utmost importance of translating evidence-based research into build tailored policies and programs. Some of the colleagues that are today in the webinar are also members of this regional group on child marriage that we have, that is called the RAF, Regional Accountability Framework. It's really a space in which we share the research that is going on in the region, and also we talk about how to improve the work on child marriage. And this concrete element of how to translate evidence-based research into practice, into better programming, most effective, and also policies, it has been really at the core of the discussions. Many of you know that there is a wealth of research in the region on child marriage, but perhaps what is still ongoing is really to use this evidence-based and build programming. And this is what we have tried to do, or what we have invested in the last 2 years. So then, as I said, the research took 5 years, from 2016 to 2020. And then in 2020, with that objective in mind, how to use the research into programming, we, again, together, Terre and King's College London, we launched a project called Grounded in Their Lives, Comprehensive Stakeholder Engagement to Change Child Marriage Policy and Programming for Girls in the Middle East and North Africa region. A project that we will discuss with you this morning briefly, but basically a project that involved a lot of different consultations based on the research, and also to try to understand what was the areas of programming that we could enhance, but also what were the tools that were not available, and that it would have been worth it to develop. And again, my colleagues will give you more details, but some of these tools that we will present today are a child-friendly and gender-responsive process that we initiated with girls and young women through a participation process, and how their input have influenced our policy and programming. We also work very closely with the governments in Jordan and Lebanon to try to understand the policy efforts that were needed, and that the research can be of benefit. We also capture, and that is very important and has been very rewarding, I think, for all of us, some of the stories and the aspirations of girls and young women that were part of the research, and then what they wanted to say, and how they want us to tell us, all of us as practitioners and academics, what they need in child marriage programming and policy. And finally, also my colleague Alia will get us through a case management guideline that we have also done for specifically child marriage cases. So these all in all the tools that we will present today. And the last point that I would like to mention is, like, this research, these consultations, these tools have been also the core of a process that we have driven in Terre, which is our first child marriage Middle East and North Africa model of action. We will also, with my colleague Maria, get you through it, but is really a regional programmatic framework that we would like to briefly present this morning. And that has a lot to do with this whole process across the last 5-6 years that we in which we have invested. So this really webinar, as I said, is to present these milestones, but basically to discuss with you, to tell you about the learning process, the challenges, and we really want to also listen from you. How do you see, or what are also your initiatives on using evidence-based research into programming and policy on child marriage in this region? So this was a little bit of a brief introduction, and now I really want to welcome and to give the floor to Dr. Aisha Hutchinson. She would also present some of the main findings and the methodology of the research. So I'm going to share your presentation, Aisha, and the floor is yours.
Thanks, Nada. I think it will be fairly obvious when to go through the screens.
I hope that you can see it now, especially
yes.
The rest. Okay.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. Just sorting out all my screens here, putting everything in the right place. So good morning, everyone, or maybe good afternoon. It's great to have so many of you join us today, and it's really great to be able to share with you the journey, as Marta has mentioned, and all of the hard work that's been done by many people, including many of the people here through this webinar, but many others, particularly the teams in Jordan and Lebanon, in the Terre teams in Jordan and Lebanon, and I will mention the kind of all the other hard work that's been engaged by those teams, particularly through my presentation. So as you've heard, my name is Aisha Hutchinson, and I'm currently a lecturer in social sciences at King's College London, and I teach on an MA in International Child Rights and Development. And prior to this, I was at the University of Bedfordshire And that's where I was for most of the time that we were undertaking this piece of research. So as you've also heard, the purpose of today is really to show how we've used this piece of research to support practice and policy developments on child marriage in Jordan and Lebanon, and also to show the process by which that was done, and some of the outputs that we believe reflect our commitment to use research and other forms of evidence to build programs and policies that can advance the regional agenda to prevent child marriage, and most importantly, support girls and young women affected by child marriage. And so while the webinar will actually focus on this process and the outputs from our follow-up project, we also felt that it was really important for you to understand a little bit more about how and when and why the original research was constructed and undertaken, and some key findings, a tiny slice of the findings. I think you've already been sent links to the final reports from the research, and I'm only going to be able to touch on a few things. But I hope that I can give you a flavour of the original research, and also I think hopefully it will help to show how the nature of the research has actually shaped the way that we've been able to use it, and particularly in relation to the depth of the research rather than the breadth, so to speak. You'll see that the nature of the original research allows us, impacts what you can do in terms of how you use it in policy and practice contexts. And so I hope this gives you an idea then of the kind of the boundaries of what we were and were not able to do with this piece of research when thinking about how to actually use it to inform responses on the ground. So as you will already be aware, the research, the original research was undertaken in partnership between myself and Terre in Jordan and Lebanon. And my involvement was actually funded through a British Academy postdoctoral fellowship. So an unusual, a less familiar way of sort of funding research in the sector, I guess I would say. And while I led the research process and my visits to Jordan and Lebanon were funded through the postdoctoral fellowship, and also while the research, because of this, also had an academic orientation and purpose as well, Terre immediately saw the potential and the use of the research that I was proposing and talking to them about, and have contributed as much, probably more, commitment and in-kind support through like the many hours that have been provided by so many different colleagues, and not just hours of time, but expertise and commitment and drive, and the kind of the emotional energy that goes into a piece of work like this. And so was provided through many different colleagues in Jordan and Lebanon, and also from those outside of the region. And in the terms of reference that we built together when we embedded the process, wanted to embed a process of learning and development within TDH, as well as a kind of a practice-orientated focus. And we always meant for it to be used, for it to be informed practice by Terre in particular, and for it to be a piece of work done in partnership, and to build on our respective strengths and to therefore strengthen each other. And certainly in early conversations with Terre about doing a piece of work on the impact of social, religious and cultural processes on early childbearing and child marriage, teams in Jordan and Lebanon asked if I could focus my work on child marriage amongst the Syrian refugees, which had been raised by all humanitarian agencies in the region at the time as an area of growing concern and of significant child protection risk. And at this time, in about 2014, UNICEF had just released a report on drawing on marriage registration data in Jordan, which showed the disparity and the difference between the rates of child marriage amongst Jordanian population and other smaller groups within the country, and then Syrian refugees, and showing this increase in child marriage amongst this population. And at that time, there was a big call for more research. This was really strong in the region, and that momentum has continued today. as Martin mentioned, in relation to the RAF. And I know a whole body of research is followed by many different organisations, which our research, complements and strengths. You can't capture everything in one piece of research. And so this is why we focused on Syrian refugee population in these countries only, despite child marriage also being present in Lebanese and Jordanian and Palestinian communities. And of course, with the recent the impact of the recent pandemic, and also the changing sort of social, political context in Jordan and Lebanon, also see child marriage rates changing within host populations. And it's also really important to note that globally there is, and there remains really a significant gap in the evidence that we have in child marriage in crisis-affected populations. And there has been continual spotlight on this context where we see child marriage rise, where we see a slow decline of child marriage in other contexts, particularly in context of development, where there's a big increase in investment in health and education and social systems, but we see the opposite in crisis-affected populations. And so this research also contributes to that kind of global gap, although it's very specific in relation to the Syrian refugees. And I just want to note that we do only focus on girl child marriage because of the very low rates of child marriage amongst boys in these communities, and because of the qualitative difference in the experience of child marriage between boys and girls due to gendered power relationships. And also, as Martin said, the research has taken quite a long time. Data collection occurred from January 2017 to October 2018, with a lot of conversations taking place before that and a lot of work being undertaken before that. And I took several periods of maternity leave during this time and was working part-time. And while this was, quite frustrating to us at times, and we certainly felt like the pressure to have the research done, and the findings circulated, because we're aware that each day more girls would marry, and we knew that organisations and agencies and practitioners were busy working every day to prevent child marriage and support married girls. And we knew our research could help support this work. But the length of time has allowed us, particularly to build an in-depth partnership. It's allowed us time to think and reflect and to build in this process of ongoing learning. I know Marta has led a lot of work in TDH in terms of thinking about this process of using the research and process of being involved in a piece of research, and how it and what the legacy of that should be, and how that can impact on TEDs in the long term. And so it has allowed us to build in this kind of process of comprehensive stakeholder engagement, which we embarked on specifically in the follow-up project. So the broad aims, the objectives of the study was to improve knowledge and develop a culturally relevant framework of risk and protective factors associated with child marriage amongst Syrian refugee communities in Jordan and Lebanon, using an ecological framework, which is also cognizant of and informed by religious, cultural and social processes. And so part of this was to understand the impact of displacement on social processes of marriage, and to understand how child marriage was conceptualized and understood and practiced in communities, and how this was impacted by displacement, and how girls and their families experience child marriage. Another key aim was to understand and to map current responses to child marriage at the time in Jordan and Lebanon, and to examine how these aligned with the perspectives and the experiences of girls themselves, and also to better understand the impact of the formal and the informal religious, social and cultural processes in these communities in relation to child marriage. And so in the study of child marriage, obviously there's many different aspects that can be examined, and there's been globally and regionally a lot of study on the drivers of child marriage, and also the consequences, the outcomes of child marriage, particularly statistical associations that are based on large-scale survey data, as well as data from organisations working with Syrian refugee communities. And there's also a growing evidence globally in relation to and regionally on interventions to prevent child marriage, what approaches to use, whom to target, what actually works and makes a difference. However, child marriage is also the result of micro processes within a family and community, as well as the larger macro processes and structural drivers that we are more familiar with. And therefore, the framing of this study was actually to consider and examine child marriage within the broader social processes of marriage, and to speak about child marriage in this way to research participants in order to understand how displacement disrupts accepted social processes and how these are adapted and how this impacts decision-making and marriage practices. So we were concerned with the kind of the micro level experience of child marriage from a perspective of girls and also their parents, as well as we were also interested in kind of the interventions and programs that were taking place and looking at how these connected. But I think it is really important to note that obviously the experiences, the drivers and the conceptualizations of child marriage are not homogenous. And so child marriage can also be quite a specific form and manifestation of child exploitation and trafficking. A child marriage might also be the result of sexual violence or rape, or where a perpetrator then married a victim to avoid punishment. Child marriage can also be the result of an explicitly forced marriage, although how this is understood is contested. And we didn't actually include these forms of child marriage, these manifestations of child marriage in our research, although of course the line between them and is sometimes not clear. But we didn't speak with any participants whose marriage had come around in these ways. And so it's important to, and we did that intentionally, largely due to the sensitivity and the nature of ethics, and realizing that that our form of questioning on our interest in relation to marriage as part of the wider social process would not be appropriate or ethically sensitive or of care in any way to those specific kind of contexts. So it's important to note that our work doesn't reflect those experiences, we talk to that manifestation of child marriage. And so these were the overriding research questions. So we were looking at how the refugee context, changes the process and experience of child marriage, how concepts of risk and vulnerability and protective factors and successful outcomes are understood, how various professionals respond to child marriage and what support services are available, and how the cultural, religious and legal process impact the practice of child marriage. I see there's a hand up. Is there?
That's mine from Vesna, just to have information that it's around 15 minutes how you will be presenting, just to make sure about the timeline, okay?
Okay, thank you. So the research was designed predominantly as a piece of qualitative research in order to answer the research questions and to draw on the wider range of methodologies to answer these questions, and other sub-questions were constructed. So the research was founded through a systematic literature review in both Jordan and Lebanon, undertaken before fieldwork, and you'll see there was a short kind of quantitative assessment tool with 144 Syrian refugee households in Jordan, and the rest was this in-depth qualitative research. And so we carried out 21 in-depth narrative interviews with married and engaged girls, asking them about their life in Syria, about displacement, about their hopes and dreams prior to marriage. We asked them about the marriage process and their preparation for marriage. We asked about the proposal they received and how they gave consent to marriage. We spoke about the engagement and the marriage process, including marriage registration. We asked about who was involved, who did what, how they felt about that all. And then we also asked about life after marriage and the impact on education and health and housing and relationships. And we asked how they felt about their marriage and marrying young, and their hopes and dreams, and what kind of support they would have liked, would like now, and the advice that they would give to others. And we also asked a similar set of questions, they framed differently to their families. Then we asked these separately, had separate interviews. And these were also complemented by focus groups with girls and boys and mothers and fathers within the same Syrian refugee communities. And we use vignettes and activities to examine the social process of marriage and the impact of displacement, and also the risks that girls face and any local forms of protection. And I just want to highlight that these interviews and focus groups were carried out by practitioners in Jordan and Lebanon, predominantly case managers and PSS facilitators, because of the way that they daily engage with girls and boys with issues of child protection and having these kind of conversations, and were known by participants and obviously spoke fluent Arabic and already had a foundation of skills to use in order to be able to engage in these kind of sensitive, potentially sensitive conversations. And so we did additional training to kind of highlight the difference that it is asking these questions in relation to a research process. And all of the participants were identified by the case managers or supervisors in both Jordan and Lebanon. And a lot of time was spent telling them about the research, what would be the process, gaining consent, ensuring that they were happy to contribute, and that it would not cause harm. And we had quite a lot of protocols in place in relation to ethics. And then you'll see, in addition, I spoke with 42 practitioners and policymakers across Jordan and Lebanon involved in the response to child marriage, a range of different actors and from different sectors, and these were identified largely through the networks that TDH had, and a colleague from TDH would often support that process if translation was needed. And then we also spoke with 20 faith-based actors in Jordan and Lebanon, including Sharia court judges, imams, mufti, several sheikhs, and a member of the Women and Children's Directorate in the Ministry of Education and Ministry of Religion in Jordan, and several faith-based NGOs working with refugees. 2 were female and the rest were male, and we spoke with them about marriage jurisprudence and theological perspectives on child marriage and the underpinnings of consent, child marriage law, the drivers and the consequences of child marriage, as well as specific examples of precept. So as you can imagine, we had a huge amount of data, most of it qualitative, resulting in quite lengthy and complicated analysis, and resulting also in quite lengthy and complicated findings. And so the findings, it's not really possible to go into much detail now. And some of the findings may be loosely referred to throughout the webinar, and particularly some of the findings or the research process, or actually, of course, form part of the foundation for the outputs that are going to be described later. And so we had a number of, I think you've also been sent the documents, but you'll see that because of the micro focus of child marriage, we were able to in detail look at how these child marriages were facilitated within the context, why and how certain decisions were made, and the impact of displacement on those decisions. We were also able to look at how girls are prepared for marriage and the nature of the consent to marriage, the consequences of child marriage at a very personal or micro level, and the kind of help-seeking behaviours that we use to draw on informal rather than formal resources. The research does show the kind of the rise in the recognition of child marriage as a protection concern, but we found very, very few specific policies dedicated to child marriage that were sort of hadn't illuminated kind of an in-depth understanding of kind of the theory of change and how that fitted within integrated programming, lots of multi-sector engagement, and we looked at the strengths and weaknesses of that, and also documented, the limitations and challenges and gaps that practitioners were faced with at that time. And finally, our interviews with faith-based actors revealed quite a wide range of involvement in marriages, and question the homogeneity of faith-based actors, lots of different types of influences, particularly between those who had a role in the formal legal processes and those who were much more involved in kind of creating the social and cultural constructions of marriage. And a whole range of attitudes in relation to child marriage, concept of maturity and consent often more important than age. Concerns different red lines in terms of what would be acceptable reasons for child marriage, and not particularly pregnancy outside of marriage. Everyone said would be an acceptable reason, but marriage for poverty, because the poverty's sake, was not seen as so acceptable. But decisions were often made on a case-by-case basis, rather than having a blanket, we do or do not agree with child marriage. Because often we have to know the individual circumstances before we make a decision. And it also spoke about the limits to their role and their influence. So I'm going to finish now. Because the research reports are available, and I'm happy to have further ongoing conversations specifically about the research, and so just email me there on the details there, and hopefully that gives you a good foundation for the rest of the things to come in this webinar.
Thank you, Aisha. Thank you so much for driving us through the methodology that, as she was highlighting, that is a very important part of the research. The findings, as Aisha was highlighting, I mean, obviously, there are quite a lot, and we would not have time to go over them, but she has provided a summary. I just want to let you know that Vesna, our colleague, had left the link on the chat, and something that is very practical is that this research is composed by 7 pieces of work, thematic pieces of work. So it's also very useful if you are interested in one concrete topic of the research. So as you've seen, almost 5 years of research, as Aisha was mentioning, a lot of work, energy, and a huge learning process. But then the research finalized, and then we are able to close the research process with also a lot of happiness, because as for all of you that have done research, you know what it is. And then we really quickly start thinking on, okay, and now what do we do with the research? How we can really use the research, all the investment across all these 5 years, as Aisha was saying, with so many people involved, not only in the research process, but throughout the discussions, the consultations, and this a little bit what we were brainstorming among us, but also, as I said, within the Regional Accountability Working Group, Child Marriage in the Middle East, and obviously other practitioners and academics working on child marriage. And then in 2020, we jointly designed this project that I was speaking about before, Grounded in Their Lives, comprehensive stakeholder engagement to enhance child marriage policy and programming. When we said comprehensive stakeholder engagement, it's like, okay, let's discuss with all of these actors that we have engaged with to drive and carry out the research process into what do we do, how policy and programming child marriage in the region can be supported by this enormous and very valuable piece of research. And that I just want to share with you that the process was really, the outcomes are great, but the process has been obviously the same value as the outcomes, because we engage consultations with external stakeholders. I will mention a few. UNICEF Regional Office as co-chair of the RAF, but also with governments, directly with the National Council for Family Affairs in Jordan, having a direct link of discussion with them. Also the Ministry of Social Affairs in Lebanon. That was very interesting because it brings obviously the vision of different actors, UN agencies, government. We also engage in quite in-depth discussions with Girls Not Brides, and I think that Jean is here this morning. And it was very interesting because, for example, the discussion that we were having with them around is like the very complex concept of consent. And we all know, Aisha was saying, how many different type of situations we can have when we talk about a child marriage. And it was a very interesting discussion to really focus some of the brainstorming on that. And then we also engage really in the discussions with key national actors in both countries. In Lebanon, we were having quite in-depth discussions on the research finding and how to use it in policy and programming with ABAD, the Resource Center for Gender Equality, and I have seen that there is also Randa in the group. They were highlighting also how how to give back the research to the communities. Okay, you finalize a process of research, and then how all of these people in those communities, how you really take back the research to them through different avenues. So again, a very interesting process, and we did also engage in conversations with the Arab Women's Legal Network, which is a network of gender-oriented organization, women's rights, but also youth organizations within the network. So very interesting. But in addition to that, this comprehensive stakeholder engagement, obviously we did engage deeply with our teams in TDH from both Jordan and Lebanon, but also from other countries of the region, to whom we are truly grateful. This process was also for them. Sometimes I'm not sure if that has happened to some of you that have driven research, but then there are a group of people really involved, and then you want this research to be used across an organization, right? To expand the learnings, to get on board a lot of colleagues, and they were really very generous, and it was so amazing, the process of learning, you know, among colleagues, part of the same organization with Aisha, and how to really, you know, how to really incorporate this research into the programming and policy work that we do in the organization. And last but not least, and Julia will navigate us through that process, we did engage in a consultation process with girls, adolescents, girls and young women, particularly in Jordan and Lebanon. So again, to raise their voices, to understand from them. And so that consultation process, that, as I said, the process has enormous value, because we were building programming not just from the lens of one organization doing programming on child marriage, but with the support of many actors in the region from different agencies, having different perspectives, and again, I mean, most importantly also with the adolescents, girls and young women that we work with. So this is the process, and then of course part of this process was to identify some outcomes. What do we do? What we can do in tangible, you know, in practice? What are some of the tools that we can create, learning from all of this information and all of these discussions? And this is what my colleagues this morning will present. We have basically developed some tools that I mentioned at the beginning, and I just don't want to steal more time, because I just prefer that they present. They've been also the ones developing the tools. So the first one that we want to share with you, Vesna will share the link because the products are already available online, but also Alia will just, you know, share with us this morning what is this case management guideline for child marriage cases in the MENA region. So Alia is our colleague, is a colleague that works in Lebanon, in TDH Lebanon, and Alia is the GBV team leader of the team in Lebanon. So Alia, the floor is yours, and thanks a lot.
Thanks, Marta. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this webinar. First, I am very happy. I am very happy that this webinar is coming in the first day of the 16 days of activity. Today, I will focus on the child marriage case management guidelines. I will identify it only in 5 minutes. The child marriage case management guidelines is a compilation between existing guidelines and the research grounded in their lives. And this guidelines aim to tailor the case management standard, and focus on how caseworker can be work in the issue of child marriage during their child marriage intervention. The objective of this child marriage guideline is not to stop child marriage, but to obtain how we can find the risk of the child marriage, and according to this risk, the caseworker with the survivor of child marriage can be able to put a plan together and work upon this risk and the needs of these girls or women. This guidelines focus on many terms. Any caseworker if they read it, it will find it very flexible to work in their case management. It focuses on many terms as what is case management, what is child marriage, and then they can find the 6 steps of child marriage. In the first step, in the identification, you can find the profile of the three girls or that are affected by child marriage risk. The girls at risk of being married, or the girls that already married, and the girls that divorced or widowed. And in the assessment, you can find many questions that support you to do your assessment, and it focuses in the 5 well-being pillars. You can do this assessment focus on the safety, on the relation, and the rights, and the emotion of the girls. And then in the case planning, you can find the 3 levels of the risk: high, medium, and low, and how you can build your case plan with the survivor. Then in the follow-up and the implementation, you can be able easily how to do this follow-up, and also in the closure. What I want to say, any caseworker can, if he read this guidelines, he will be able to do his case management intervention with any girls affected by child marriage risk. Thank you. Anyone have any questions?
Thank you, Alia. Thank you so much. There's nice monitoring the questions. So, I mean, whenever we have, we will address them to you. Thanks a lot for guiding us through that. I just want to perhaps to share one of why case management guideline, that the one that Alia was explaining. Based on the qualitative findings of the research, we gathered a lot of very insightful information from girls, adolescents, girls, and young women that were going through case management process. And so we also knew from them what's working, what is not working. And then also from the case managers, as Alia was mentioning, we're not reinventing. I mean, the case management, we're using the basis of the child protection GBV case management. But what is very interesting about this very specific case management guideline is it does focus on the very concrete elements that we have learned happen to adolescents, girls, and young women. So of course, it's built on child protection GBV, but it really emphasized on very specific elements on these cases. And therefore, we really hope it's going to be useful and enhancing the process of case management whenever a child marriage case is part of, arrives to the system. So
if I may, I just wanted to add here that I also think that a very, a good strength of this guideline is also to really mainstream psychosocial support, which is actually to make sure that, within the process itself, there are, components and questions that you can go through that already support directly the psychosocial well-being of the adolescents and young women. So I think this is really also an important aspect of proceeding to this ongoing psychosocial support while you are actually looking, analyzing the situation and planning for actions.
Exactly. No, thanks, Maria, for pointing this out. Okay, so let's move to our next tools, indeed. And I just want to introduce you to Julie Rialet, and we are really grateful that Julie is here with us this morning. Julie has been working on this project with us as an independent professional consultant, really dealing the design and the coordination of all of these tools that we are presenting today. She has a wealth of experience on child marriage globally, and also in the Middle East and North Africa region. And we're very happy and again grateful that she can be with us this morning. Julie is gonna briefly present to us the work that we have done with the authorities, the policy briefs, but also the other tool, which is the one that I think we all feel more proud about, which is all the projects that we have done with the adolescents, girls, and the young women, child-friendly tools that we were building, and also some of their stories that they wanted to share with us, and what we have done with them. So Julie, the floor is yours, and yeah, I will be screening some of the tools, and Vesna will be sharing also in the chat the tools, so you can all access to them if you want.
Wonderful. Thanks, Marta. And I'm very happy to be here today as well. Hello, everyone. So I think we're just starting with the policy briefs, right? So the idea with the policy briefs was really to kind of recognize that addressing child marriage needs multi-sectoral solutions. So the idea was to draw out the recommendations from the research that were particularly relevant to specific sectors. And so the ultimate goal was really to help some of the relevant ministries to engage with the research findings and consider the research findings, just kind of echoing with Aisha was saying earlier about the wealth of data that we have in the research material. So really helping ministries to navigate this and turning research into practice, like really. So the briefs, so we developed two briefs that really make the case for why addressing child marriage among all communities in Jordan and Lebanon, both refugees and nationals, is essential to achieving education and economic goals. I'll just say a bit more later about why those two sectors and how relevant ministries can work in these areas to help address child marriage. So it's really kind of both way, saying how addressing child marriage is benefiting kind of both sides. So the way that we work to develop those products, so we worked closely with Mirabu Mogli, another consultant, Jordanian consultant, working on gender and child protection, to organize a couple of rounds of consultation in Arabic directly with various actors. Really wanted to focus on the policy level. Obviously, I mean, Marta said a bit about the broader kind of consultation with various actors, but for these products, we really wanted the policy perspective. So in Jordan, we mainly consulted with the National Committee on Child Marriage, which is a government-led body with members of the government, but also NGOs and UN representative, and coordinated by the National Council for Family Affairs. So our colleague Mira presented most of the most relevant part of the research findings kind of by sector. So we had, I think we probably had like 6 or 7 relevant sectors that we went through to really help the committee identify a couple of sectors that we should focus the briefs on. And that decision was kind of based on both the finding itself themselves, like what they found most relevant, but also their ongoing priorities to make sure that we were building on what was the effort that were already in place in those countries. So in Lebanon, we did exactly the same process, but with just a few actors involved. So we mainly consulted with the child marriage focal point at the Ministry of Social Affairs, which was partly because of the difficult political situation in Lebanon and changes of staff. So it made it quite difficult for us to consult a bit further. What was I saying? So that was kind of the first part of the consultation, and we initially thought of developing separate briefs for each countries, but actually the consultations in both Lebanon and Jordan, the actors involved identify education and economic growth as the most directly relevant areas. So what we did was just develop 2 common briefs and highlighting some specific considerations for respective countries in a few boxes. So when you go through the brief, you can see that throughout. And just to finish on the consultation process in Jordan, then we basically developed the brief after the identification of the two sectors. We had the draft briefs, which were reviewed and validated reviewed especially by a representative of the Ministry of Education and by a livelihood expert as well as part of the Ministry of Social Development, and with the whole committee. So it was a really kind of participatory process, both in terms of consultation and validation, which was great both for the content and for the process itself, as Marta was explaining earlier. So just I'm going to try and run quite quickly through the actual content, but it's really kind of giving you a flavor of what's in those briefs, and I really invite you to go through them because the content is really rich while trying to be quite synthetic. But they're both structured the same way. We have an introduction that really highlights what's being done so far to address child marriage in Jordan and in Lebanon and globally as well, just setting the scene. And then on the next page, you have a very synthetic snapshot of the research findings. And what we've tried, just kind of highlighting the differences between the two briefs here, is just putting a bit more emphasis on the research findings that were most relevant to the different sectors. So for example, in the education one, we put an emphasis on one of the key findings being that the whole process of from the first marriage proposal to the actual marriage all happens at the time of secondary education, which is quite relevant for education policies. While in the economic empowerment brief, we put more the emphasis on that vicious circle that exists between poverty and child marriage, with poverty being the driver of child marriage and child marriage trapping households in poverty, which is especially true among refugee communities where so many people are living under the poverty line in both countries. So that's kind of about the structure. And then the biggest part, obviously, of the brief was turning those research findings into concrete recommendations for the ministries. So in the education one, just running quickly through them, first recommendation that we came up with was to provide education opportunities, not only for girls at risk of child marriage, but also for married girls and divorced girls. And so that is through both kind of formal and non-formal education opportunities. So like removing barriers to formal education, but also providing non-formal education to really help empower married girls and divorced girls to respond to the challenges that they're facing in their lives. Highlighting a really good resource by IRC as well on this, with like a tailor package for married girls and engaged girls, which is really, really useful to build upon. Some of the ideas that we had also around that was gathering education experts to try and identify what is really feasible in terms of the formal school environment, because we know that there are many challenges for married and divorced girls to get back to a formal school environment. So like really brainstorming ideas around like having specific groups that would be compatible with their schedules when they have kids to take care of, or how you can really try and build peer groups of support outside of school as well. So there are many more kind of like very concrete recommendations in there. The second one was kind of equipping unmarried girls. So we just talk about married girls and divorced girls, but also really equipping unmarried girls with the knowledge and skills that they need to approach this issue of child marriage. Because I think this one we particularly highlighted, recognizing that while the families remain the key decision makers when it comes to choosing like suitable acceptable suitor, etc. The families from the research, it was really clear that they still ask for the girl's opinion. So it's really finding a way to provide them with knowledge and skills to help them understand what they are saying yes to, especially when they're dreaming about marriage and the white dress, etc. Like what they are saying yes to, help them speak out if they don't want to get married, and help them reach out to relevant actors in their surrounding to support them with their choices. That can be done through integration through the formal school curriculum and informal education program. Again, there we give a lot of concrete examples of things that you can discuss, both in formal and non-formal environments, that are really useful. Beyond just focusing on girls, obviously, there is a big recommendation about supporting families and communities to be investing in girls' education, with recommendations around providing opportunities for parents of unmarried and divorced girls, but also husbands and in-laws of married girls, to actually get really engaged and invested in the school community and informal education community, and quite a traditional kind of recommendation, but also informing them about the risk of child marriage. I think the difference in this brief with what we usually hear about informing parents or close relatives about the risk of child marriage is really to try and adapt the type of messaging that you bring to this family based on the profiles, because I think Aisha mentioned that obviously it's not like a uniform picture of all refugee families being the same, etc. So in the research, we had the example of families from more rural conservative backgrounds that might not see the value in girls' education, while others would have actually preferred investing in girls' education, but turned to marriage in the context of more kind of limited alternatives in displacement. So the idea there is really to adapt your messaging to those different profiles. Okay, I'm trying to get a bit quicker because I can see that I'm running out of time. Then the next recommendation really going into addressing the structural barriers to formal school and preventing school dropout. So again, we highlighted in the box on the next page some of the actual barriers that exist in both Jordan and Lebanon to accessing formal education for refugee girls. And highlighting quite a lot of measures there on how to try and prevent school dropouts, having good prevention measures, etc., that ministry can build on. And then the last recommendation, which is common to both briefs, is to adopt and support a multi-agency approach at both policy and practice level. Just a really important one, echoing what we know more generally about effective solutions to addressing child marriage and the need for a really comprehensive approach, collaborating with many different actors at many different levels. So this part of the recommendation just runs through some of the sectors and actors that are particularly important for the education sector to collaborate with, to be able to implement those recommendations. So that's for the education brief. Do I still have time to run quickly through the economic one, or should I move to? Yeah, I'll go on then. So on the economic empowerment recommendations, maybe just actually one kind of overarching point about those two recommendations was that for the education brief, it was really recognizing that the Ministry of Education in both Jordan and Lebanon had already made a very important contribution to the development of national action plans to address child marriage at the national level. So the recommendations were kind of echoing what was already existing and adding to those recommendations to help education policy makers meeting their objective and fulfill their commitment that they already have. I think for the economic empowerment brief, it was a bit different because the way that there were in national policies to address child marriage, there were a number of measures around economic and living conditions that were defined in national plans, but maybe a bit more scattered and less centralized into kind of one pre-identified entity that would be responsible for everything economic related. So we put a strong emphasis in the brief on the need for governments to ensure that specific actors were identified to lead and contribute to the implementation of each recommendation in that brief. I think that was quite an important point. So in this brief, the first recommendation is really to provide economic empowerment opportunities for married and divorced girls. So same as the education brief, actually a lot of this can go through non-formal and formal education. So I'm not going to repeat too much of that. It's pretty much in line with the education brief, with the exception of maybe the last point that stress the potential engagement with the private sector to include gender status and age-sensitive opportunities for married and divorced girls as part of any existing youth employment initiatives. So that could be, for example, relevant ministries supporting companies to provide internships, mentorship programs for refugee girls, promoting self-employment or home-based professional activities, etc. Was quite a different point. Then the second recommendation is really about supporting families' livelihoods. So we're saying a lot here around the global evidence already existing on conditional cash transfers, usually conditioned to education. So the recommendations here are really trying to put the focus on carrying out vulnerability assessment in different settings, refugee settings, to really identify the most vulnerable households and those that have girls in age of receiving marriage proposal, and really explore the opportunity of developing CCT programs as it has been done in other contexts, and really monitor their impact. The next recommendation, also in line with what was highlighting in the education brief, is more about addressing the structural barriers to employment and promoting economic inclusion for refugee communities, and especially for girls. So I'm not going to run through this, but we have some key facts there about what has been done already in both Jordan and Lebanon to improve economic inclusion for refugee populations, which is a really good start to build upon for more kind of initiatives targeted to girls as well. So one of the points highlighted here is really trying to actually, on top of all of those initiatives, really promote a gender sensitive approach into all employment and livelihood policies, and really ensuring every time that it really provides specific measures for refugee population into those policies. And the last one is really just the same as in the education brief, about promoting this multi-agency approach at both policy and practice level. So quite hard to kind of summarize, but again, like really urging you to have a look at those briefs and see it in a bit more detail, what's the practical recommendations that are included in those. So the third product that I wanted to talk about. So maybe I'll on this one, well, you can see that the product is actually very straightforward. It's quite short and it's easy to navigate. So I'll explain more about how it was developed and why it was developed. So basically this one, the child-friendly, adolescent-friendly version of the research findings, was really to inform research participants, but also other girls and families in similar situations, of the research findings, I think Aisha mentioned like how many girls she spoke to, and also the TGA's team at the in Jordan and Lebanon, how many community members they spoke to, etc. So it was really to first bring it back to them, but also consulting them and other adolescent girls to really help us bring it back to communities. And so communicating the research findings, more specifically among the findings, we thought it was one thing that came out was the fact that girls at risk of child marriage didn't really know enough about what they could expect if they got married, and married girls on the other end didn't always know whether their experience of marriage and of what they were experiencing in married life was isolated, or whether there was other girl facing the same challenges. So one of the big objectives was to find a way to communicate what the research found about what married life is like, and to share it in a way that was interesting and for girls and responding to their needs. So what we did was we organized a 2-hour in-person focus groups with girls in both Jordan and Lebanon. These were carried out by experienced child protection officers in the TDH teams who were trained to obviously receive disclosures and provide psychological support if it was needed while we were going through the research findings with girls. So what we did was presenting the research finding in 2 different formats, again using vignettes that were based on a mixture of the interviews from the actual research. From this, we created some fictive characters inspired by the experience of girls from the research. On the one hand, 2 unmarried girls going from the journey from being unmarried to being engaged, and then on the other end, 1 married girl. So it was really in the form of stories. And on the other hand, we presented in a more formal way the research findings with bullet points with some risk and protective factors around child marriage. And the idea was really to just observe how girls were reacting to those 2 different formats, and also ask them directly about how they understood the research, how they would approach information better, asking them to share ideas about any books they had come across or shows or anything really they could think of that would be most useful for them, and to reach out to as many young people as possible in their communities. So it was a really interesting process that confirmed the importance of unmarried girls to hear from married girls about the experience. So it just really helped us confirm like the very how to say that like the very rationale for the product in the very first place. It also confirmed that girls definitely related more to stories and visual, which was one of the reasons why we developed this type of a tool. So the idea was for the poster to be both printed and also used as a digital illustration, especially to be posted on social media, which was also something that girls highlighted as like one of the key platforms that they used. And that could also be accessed by boys as well, was actually quite something that came up in both countries. So yeah, really interesting process, hearing from the girls, developing something that spoke to them. I think the main challenge in doing that was obviously developing a 1-page, very visual content, starting from like a 500-page research with very rich content. You always feel like you're going to miss something and you're not going to be faithful to the wealth of the data. But I think, I think we tried to do a good job in really identify those most important messages with girls, and working with designers to do something quite accessible. Sorry, that was a bit long.
No, thank you, Julie. It also reflects, you know, the huge work behind that, and so thanks for the presentation. The last part that we really want to briefly share with you today is like, all in all, this is 6 years of work, and then at TDH, we wanted to have this, what we call the model of action, child marriage MENA, which is really for us the regional model to guide the some operations in design, implementation, and monitoring of our intervention on child marriage. It has an intention to improve, to be more comprehensive, to shift also a little bit the way we partner with our partners, and bring on board also new ones with a different way of partnering. So it has been really a very interesting internal process. We will be sharing externally also this product, but I mean, we just want to be, you know, in 5 minutes to also showcase in a snapshot of what is this model of action. Is now in the design phase and will be ready for our colleagues, for our teams as members of Terre, but also we will share externally in recognition of that this model of action is also infused by all the learning, all our participation in working groups, discussions with key stakeholders. So it is something also that we want to share. And my partner in crime with this to build this model in the building of this model of action is Maria Bray, who is also with us today. It's been a huge work, never ending. We were also both discussing, okay, we need to close it at some point, because you can always add more, think differently. You all that work on child marriage know how complex it is. So I just want to welcome Maria Bray. Maria Bray is our Global Child Protection and MHPSS advisor in TDH. And we both together, we were putting together all these inputs that we have from our colleagues, but also from external stakeholders. So she's gonna, I'm just giving you the floor, Maria, and I will share this snapshot. And thanks a lot also for presenting briefly this model of action.
Thanks, Marta, and very happy to be here and to have the opportunity to listen live, you know, to all this amazing work that has been done. So I will try not to be too long. I think, I mean, as you say, Marta, it is, I mean, the documents and we are trying to simplify as much as possible, because as you said, there's just so much in terms of, I mean, what we learn, thanks to the research and for the teamwork and the collaboration with the different stakeholders. And it's a real challenge to try to capture and to put all that together. But we really try to build on, you know, some of the key trends, the structural drivers, consequences, and gaps in addressing child marriage in the Middle East region. So our focus in the theory of change are the adolescents and young women, and at-risk and married girls, children of young mothers, and more broadly, I would say, adolescent girls and young women. And this doesn't mean, however, that we don't also look at adolescent boys and young men who should be part of child marriage intervention. And actually, they play an essential role to support, you know, girls' decision-making and addressing child marriage. And we made sure to actually look at that and include that within the different pathway of change we've been working on. So on this slide, you can see, I mean, again, you don't have the whole detail theory of change, which is really looking at, you know, you can see here on the ecological framework and these circles, you can see the main outcomes we are trying to target linked with the different level of the socio-ecological framework. And for each of them, we've been looking at developing a detailed pathway of change, looking at what needs to be done in order to reach out this type of objective. So we also look here at some of the transversal approaches and core strategies and long-term outcomes and effect on the right. I mean, of course, some of you might know, I mean, theory of change is a big word to say that we are looking at really different aspects. And we also looked, which is also crucial, to look at what are our assumptions and what are the risks, you know, that are engaged when you are when you want to have, you know, a specific pathway of change and so on. So these are not captured here, but this is also something we've been looking at. So maybe briefly, I mean, in terms of transversal approaches, And what we mean here is approaches that should be taken in consideration, you know, when you do the design, implementation, and monitoring of child marriage intervention. And they are, I mean, we are seeing them as really a foundation on which, you know, the whole theory of change is based. So there are many, as you can see. We try to cluster them. You know, we've got three different types, I would say, of approaches. One category is around right-based protection and ensuring a gender and diversity lens. So this means that we should ensure child marriage intervention promotes child rights and are informed by gender and child right analysis, and also ensuring that we identify, you know, hard to reach, marginalized and at-risk group within the context where we work, and ensure that we look at also the barriers and the risk they face. And the strategy they're using to support them. Another category of approaches is to promote the well-being, resilience, and empowerment of adolescents, girls, and young women. I mean, in TDH, we have really a strong, I would say, focus on linking up participation, well-being, and empowerment are very strongly interrelated, you know, components. And so here, what we mean with this theory of change is really ensuring a child survivor-centered approach. And it's also, as I was just mentioning, promoting psychosocial resilience of the girls, the family, communities. And for this, we believe that it's key to really work towards participation and empowerment of adolescent girls and young women. And this should be actually really systematic, including, you know, promoting adolescent girls and young women-led initiatives, dialogues, and action research, and really putting them at the center of our work. And I mean, I think that what we heard from Aisha and Julie, I mean, this is already, and Alia also, this is already something we are trying to really put forward in all the piece of work we are developing under this topic. A third category of approach is about, of course, aiming at a sustainable protective system. And that means that you need to work into, and this was really a very great opportunity to have this huge research done to better understand, you know, some of the norms, behavior, and contributing factors for child marriage in some context, and support that ultimately can help us to support behavior change. But it also means that you need to really look at conflict analysis to better understand the different stakeholders, community dynamics, and decision-making process at different levels, which might be different according to different contexts. And it's also about identifying entry points and influences that might vary again according to the context, and adapting the intervention linked with the different stages also of emergency. I mean, linked with the famous nexus that everyone's talking about, you know, that approaches needs to be aligned with what stages of emergency or stabilization you are in different countries. So this is about the transversal approach, which really should be grounding the whole strategies and interventions. So when we look at the different strategies, and here there's nothing really new linked with what we just heard, because everything is building on that. So I mean, of course, as you see also, everything is designed around the socio-ecological model, which is really for us one of the key strategies that should be applied and should be looked at, you know, parallelly, to see how we can work parallelly into this different ecological level. So of course, you've got adolescent girls and young women who should be at the core of the work. And of course, girls in the region are predominantly and directly affected by child marriage. But again, it's still important to engage with their peers and boys and men through positive masculinity approaches to tackle social norms related to child marriage. Work with parents, spouses, wider families and communities should also, of course, take place. And then at community, national and regional level, as we heard also, it's critical to strengthen services, systems and policies to address child marriage. So in addition, I mean, to this socio-ecological model, there is also this emphasis done on multi-sectoral approaches. And this was mentioned also by Julie. And I think this is key. And for TDH, that means concretely, for example, that we try to ensure that we work across the different sectors of specialization for Terre des Hommes, which are, migration, access to justice, and child and maternal health. But also we need to make sure that we complement, our intervention with other partners that have specific expertise on some other special sectors like education, livelihood, even shelter. And there is this strong emphasis on our model of action on the importance of partnership and working really in complementarity with other different stakeholders and sectors. Then the other strategy that is important is really to look at, and I think that we heard that also in the different intervention today, is really at looking at working. I mean, of course, that seems, ambitious, but really having in mind all the different axes, whether it's prevention, response, and system building, and looking at what can be done in these three different areas. Of course, prevention is key and is critical. By working with at-risk girls and their families, then you can work towards providing alternative to child marriage, avoid long-lasting harm caused to girls. But it's also about making sure that you can provide responses to girls that are already married, and the consequences that they face linked to that. And then, of course, parallelly to that, in order to aim for sustainability, you need to continue working and continuously working with system building for longer term development and peace building agendas in the region as well. So as you can see here, I mean, you have different outcomes that are captured into the ecological framework. So we can see that linked with adolescent girls and young women, we are looking at really trying to support access, aid gender responsive support and opportunities, and for them to be empowered to be able to make their own decision. The parents and caregivers and families, and which also includes, of course, peers and boys and men. The idea here is to support them in valuing alternative options to child marriage and having the opportunity to make this alternative options, and support adolescents, girls, and young women to make their own choice. So here we already see, the very core importance of working towards empowerment, participation, and in order to ensure sustainability in these processes. At community level, again, this is about, really supporting peers, boys, also and men, community leaders, faith-based actors, as we heard, customary justice actors in tackling child marriage and promoting positive social gender norms. So this is really, of course, what underlies a lot of some of the push factors linked to child marriage. We have this specific layer that is really looking at multi-sectoral services, because we highlight this importance of working together with the different sectors at the same time. And here it's about really making sure that we have qualitative services, but also gender responsive, and really looking at the different sectors to provide safe access to these services by the girls and the children. And finally, of course, looking at policies and supporting national systems to address child marriage, and ensuring gender justice is promoted through evidence-based research, law reform, policy support. And this is what we've seen already, and we heard today about, what some of the aspect that we are trying to target in our overall, I would say, multi-stakeholder work in the region. And so we have here, a statement about the impact that again highlights the importance of the well-being and empowerment that we are trying to target. And this is done through, again, responsive services, meaningful opportunities about empowerment, again, supporting their peers, family communities, and strengthening gender justice systems to address child marriage. So concretely also on the right side, and I will not go through all of them in detail, but you can see that what we are also trying to capture here is the long-term outcome effect very concretely at the level of the adolescents, girls and young women in terms of reduction of marriage, pregnancies, helping them to be able to make informed choices at the level of the family and communities, where we speak about decrease, again, harmful social norms at the system level, where it's about really empowerment again of national civil society and girls and women to be able to share their voice and have spaces to support advocacy and programming. And again, targeting changes in terms of having clear action plans at the level of national and regional level. So in addition to this, I mean, again, I would encourage you, I mean, we'll share it as soon as it's ready. It's right now working on the design to make it digestible. But the idea is really that you can have then access to the detail pathway for all of the different outcomes we mentioned. And maybe one last point I want to mention is about, you know, we've been working on a matrix of intervention, because ultimately the whole work here is really targeting, you know, all field operators, of course, TDH field operators, but also others, to really have a vision of all what can be done and what are the potential of action that can be put in place in order to aim at these changes. And so this matrix of intervention is really there also to support, you know, the design and the reflection of what is being done right now in a given context, and gives ideas about specific methodologies of and specific intervention, and referring to guidances, you know, not only TDHs, but of course there's so much great ones out there. Julie, you mentioned the IRC one that is also, I mean, we've got a lot of different organizations, national and international, that have been developing already great methodologies and toolkits that we try to refer to really support and have this broader idea of what is available to be able to act, prevent and respond on child marriage in the MENA region. That's it, I'm done.
Thank you, Maria. No, we're really excited to share that. I mean, Maria has just presented a snapshot, but it's really a very detailed document, because we really want to be practical. So thanks a lot. We are a little bit out of time. We have presented all that we have done. As you see, we have been working a lot, one of us. But I mean, just if there is if there is any question, please feel free to. I mean, we can stay, you know, 5-10 minutes. I'm not sure if some of, you know, the colleagues have joined, have some questions. Jean is from Girls Not Brides, and then she's asking when might this be ready. So Jean, the model of action is done. Alhamdulillah, but it's with our colleagues from design. So the commitment, the agreement is like, we will be able to share that before the year ends. So December 2021. I think we will be also publishing in our webpage, but also Child Hub here, and overall also we will share with the members of the Regional Accountability Framework for sure. And something that we have also commented while doing it, Mariana, is like, we are doing an edition 2021. We also know that these kind of tools, they need to be tested. And then the idea is like, we can run this tool for 2 years, but of course that is a live document, because as a tool, it needs to be used. And therefore, once you use tools, sometimes you realize that something is missing or something is not working. So it really aims to be also as such a process. Exactly.
Yeah, because as you were mentioning, I mean, of course, people continue to develop great resources and approaches and methodologies that could be used and referred to. And we really see, I think that, of course, the whole terror of change can be also readapt and reviewed. But I think the matrix of intervention is also one of the important pieces, I think, that should be really, as much as we can, we'll try to keep it alive, you know, to continue integrating, you know, new resources that might come along at local, national and regional level in the MENA region.
Exactly. So yeah, I mean, we're really aiming to share that as soon as possible. I don't see any other questions, unless you guys now tell me otherwise.
No, for now there are no questions. Of course, you can take this minute or two also to share any comments or question you have in the chat. I would just like also to stress out that this webinar is recording, and then you will be able to hear all of this really interesting presentation, and you can share it with your colleagues, of course, who couldn't be with us today. And also, I believe we can also share all of the links that are now in the chat. We will upload them to the Child Hub webinar page. If you have been registered for the webinar, you will get the links and the materials in the email when we upload all of it. So I think we got this in the chat, that is all of these are really valuable and inspiring. So I believe it will be shared after it. Yes.
So thanks a lot. Thanks also to all our presenters. I mean, we were also discussing this morning that it's the end of the year. We also understand that we have attended so many webinars. So for those of you that have been with us, the whole hour and a half, thank you so much. Obviously, we will continue the work, and as Vesna and the colleagues were saying, we will keep sharing the resources. And yeah, you can always reach out to any of us.
I just want to say, I take the floor, Marta, to thank you also, because I think that, again, just to acknowledge also the work and the, the dedication and the coordination and the amazing, I mean, when you see, all this production and so on, and I just want to acknowledge the great engagement and yeah, great final results that we managed to have around this this key topic in the region. So thank you very much, Marta.
Thanks a lot, and thanks to everyone. See you soon, hopefully in person and not online. So have a good day.
Just 1 minute, sorry, so 30 seconds. Sorry, just 2 technical notes. There is an email in the chat. You can see it at childhub.org. If you want to receive a certificate of attending this webinar, you can write to it and we will send you to the email. And of course, in the end, we always share a very short evaluation poll. So please give us a second to click on it. If you want to register for the newsletter of the Child Hub and to receive all the information now about the webinars and great researchers and everything, please write yes, and we will add you to our newsletter list. And that's all for me. Thank you so much for being with us today also. And I wish you a great rest of the day, of course.
Thank you, Vesna, for helping with all of this webinar. Thanks a lot to you as well.
Welcome. Welcome. It was a pleasure.